Of all the counties of Britain, perhaps the most celebrated for its wildlife is Norfolk. From the Wash in the northwest to the Broads, from the North Norfolk coast to the Brecks, everywhere there is rare and special wildlife. And protecting it since 1926 is Norfolk Wildlife Trust, which today is engaged in a national programme called Living Landscapes. Living Landscapes are about restoring habitat where it exists, recreating habitat where it has been lost, and reconnecting areas of isolated habitat. Crucially, it's also about reconnecting people with the landscapes they inhabit. Across this series, we'll be exploring the living landscapes of our county, meeting the people who are helping to restore them, and learning about the rare wildlife which inhabits them. This is Wild Norfolk. With the retreat of the Devonian glaciation some 12,000 years ago, sea level rose and Britain became an island. Since then, around half of its biodiversity, we estimate, lives on land and the other half lives in the sea. With diverse habitats stretching from the silty estuary of the Wash right through the chalk reef on the North Norfolk coast down to Breydon Water in the Broads, Norfolk is among the most fascinating counties for marine wildlife anywhere in the UK. There is a phenomenal wealth of wildlife living in the seas around Britain's shores. And yet, this wildlife and its habitat are hardly protected at all. Until very recently, just 0.001% of the seabed around Britain was protected, protecting half of all of the biodiversity in our country. From some 100 million years ago until around 70 million years ago, Britain would have been covered by a shallow subtropical sea. In this period, known as the Late Cretaceous, this sea was teeming with life. Among the most common organisms were plankton, plant plankton known as coccolithophores, which had minute plates of calcium, thought to be for focusing the energy of the sun. Over millions of years, these minute plates of calcium fell from the bodies of these plankton and gathered on the bottom of the ocean, gradually building up a layer of chalk which underlies southern Britain today. This includes the White Cliffs of Dover and the chalk that underlies the South Downs and the whole of our East Anglia.
Well, the chalk reef its extent was discovered by accident about 5 years ago. We hadn't realised there was so much of it, and we just started diving speculatively, dropping in different places along the coast, and eventually we realised it was 20 miles long, and that made it officially the longest chalk reef in the whole of Europe. And chalk is a rare marine environment. It constitutes only about 2% of our coast, and we've got most of the chalk reef in Europe, so it's very important. Here in the North Sea, it gives rise to a really biodiverse habitat with hundreds of species on it, and that's something you don't get so much on the moving areas of seabed, which are more typical in the North Sea.
From the first time we dived into the North Sea here, we noticed there was this purple sponge all over the chalk, and we assumed that it was quite a common species that must be everywhere because there was so much of it. And we got a couple of experts across and were pointing it out to them, and one of the ladies, Claire Goodwin, said, "Oh, I've never seen this before." And so she took a bit away to have a look at, and it turns out it's new to science. It doesn't grow anywhere else around the UK or the world, but it's so common on the chalk.
A lot of people think that a marine conservation zone will necessarily limit traditional activities that have always happened by the sea, but that's almost certainly not the case. What will almost certainly happen here is that the zone will be put in place and it will protect local activities as well as the chalk, and try to achieve a balance between letting local traditional fishing continue and protecting it from incoming larger scale commercial fishing. And while it does that, it'll protect the environment as is, all the nice chalk formations, the hundreds of species, as well as iconic things like the local crabs and lobsters, which everybody recognises and need rugged chalk to survive and thrive off our coast.
Of course, the sea needs to be protected for the amazing wildlife that lives in it. But it also needs to be protected for the relationship between land and sea, for the many species that live their lives between the land and the sea, including the thousands of terns that nest here in North Norfolk every summer, and the many thousands of seals that pup here along the North Norfolk coast. Critically, this relationship between land and sea is also very important in the lives of people along the North Norfolk coast. For centuries, people have taken fish, crabs, lobsters and other natural resources from the sea and supported the local economy of this entire area of Norfolk.
National Marine Week is actually 2 weeks of marine activities, happens all over the country. So it's a Wildlife Trust initiative and it's aimed at inspiring people of all ages about the sea and about marine wildlife, and it's something that we don't do a lot of all of the time, and people aren't necessarily always engaged and connected with marine wildlife, but it's vitally important that we are, because that's where life starts, and our marine ecosystem is hugely important. So we've got about 15 events this year. They're all over the county. So we've got some up at Holme Dunes, our nature reserve there. We do some at West Winton and some here at Clyde as well. So we do quite a lot of rock pooling events for children, because that's like one of the key things to get people engaged with marine wildlife, but also doing events for adults as well. So we've had coastal geology walks, we've had talk about mud, glorious mud. Today we've got an event called Tern Tuesday, highlighting the fantastic terns that live on the shingle bank just off here between Clyde and Blakeney. And that's working with National Trust. We've been working with local fishermen for our Marine Mayhem Day that we had on Saturday. So we're trying to work with the local community to really emphasise marine ecology and our marine wildlife along this coastline.
Just as with the Living Landscapes, the Living Seas campaign can only be a success if people are involved. To find out how to get involved with the Living Seas campaign, visit the Norfolk Wildlife Trust website.